All right, today I'm going to be showing you how to wire up some digital gauges. Right here we have our voltmeter, and let's see, we got our oil pressure sensor. These are pretty much simple setups. Here we have our clock. We have our fuel pressure. This will probably maybe be the most tedious one out of all of them. So we'll see on that one. So that'll be your most tedious one. That'll be all on resistance. And then right here we'll have our temperature gauge. As for the oil pressure, obviously let's just break it down in case scenarios. So the setup that I am doing it on is going to be a CJ5 or CJ8, I believe. Well, either of the or. So all right. So for the oil pressure gauge, basically this is a pretty simple setup. We're going to have our illumination lights that will be right up here. I'm kind of going into existing work. I'm just cleaning up this and making sure some gauges work. So we already had all our gauges out. I already took off all of that. I know the rat's nest right there. It's a pretty hardcore nightmare. But this is the old wire harness that it was like and stuff. So I don't really care about what it says before because I'm going to be running new wires. So I'm going to be making my own diagram. So what I did was I went to AutoZone and then we got our 16 gauge wires. There's the part number 85784. We got 100 feet of red wire. I think that should be plenty enough for this job. And then same thing, we got 85786 16 gauge black wire. I mean, if you're a color preference, I just want to make sure I have black for ground and some of the sensor wires, and then obviously our red will be for our positive wire, just so we don't get other people confused if they are working on this. All right, so let's just say for our oil pressure sensor, so obviously we have our left side. S is going to stand for our signal wire, and then our top one will be our ground wire, and then our right will be for our ignition. So S is for the sensor, ignition, and then G is the ground, or ground is ground, obviously the top one. So just so we're aware of that and you have an idea, so you don't get those mixed up, because these were mixed up prior to me working on it. For the clock one, you have a power and a ground. So I mean, basically this one for the clock, you would power one to the battery and to the negative terminal. I'll just connect this to a hot and ground at all times. The grounds you can bolt up to a chassis. Fuel gauge, same thing. We'll have our signal wire and our ground and all that. All right, let's see what else. Voltmeter, same thing. We're gonna have our ground and our ignition, so you can just bolt this anywhere, like to the battery again. Any hot wire that's on ignition only. And then same thing, is only when you do on ignition. And then same thing for this one for the coolant temperature. So yeah, our water will be just like that. Again, signal, ground, and all that. If you haven't already, give it a thumbs up, comment down below if you have any questions, and hit that subscribe button for more upcoming videos in the future. And we're going to go ahead and start this video right after the intro. All right, so obviously for the back of these tabs, depending on which wire you're using, we're going to be using 16 gauge. So these are little 16 gauge wires, the blue ones, or you can do the red ones, whatever. No, the blue ones, I believe. So I believe the blue or red, I can't remember. But these guys you would connect like that, and then you would use these as your little connectors. Now what I like to do with these guys is put like a little heat shrink on them. So you would be getting your heat shrink. There's the part number right there, 87500. If you want to do a clean setup, so you're not having so you don't have like a little voltage drop or whatever, these guys you can just cut in half depending on what size length. I think it's going to be this one. No, not that one. So we're going to be using this one actually. So we would just splice this right over. I'm not going to be showing the full details. I'm going to be just kind of showing progress on this video of how I'm doing it. So just like that, we would have it, you know, just so it's nice and clean and all that. All right, so let's get this a little bit set up. So the first one that we're going to be doing, we can either do volts or oil pressure. I want to do oil pressure as our main gauge all the way to the left, because obviously that's what I want to pay attention, or I want my customer to pay attention to that oil pressure as he's driving. So the first thing, what we're going to go ahead and do, this will be our signal wire. So we need to have one wire goes to the oil pressure sensor. So you need to locate your oil pressure sensor, and then one will be ground. So all grounds, we can connect all these guys to one ground, and then put them in a series. So as for our light, kind of just so you have a rough idea, I will be showing that later on, but just so you have another idea. So we have our positive and negatives for the light. So the light's going to be going on when you turn on the headlights, or, you know, the little dimmer light switch. So whatever on that, so whatever you prefer, if you want to connect it to the dimmer light switch. So right here, again, we have white as our positive and black obviously as our ground. So as you can see, how right here, this wasn't for me, this was from the previous person, how they connected all the red wires in one, and then all the negative wires in one side too as well, so that you don't have a whole bunch of wires all later on down the road, that it just gets more messier. So this is a perfect little setup of how I'm going to be doing it too. So we're going to go ahead and solder the other ground wires all together once we get all of them all set up. All right, since we're trying to find our oil pressure switch, now some of them might be a 2-wire and some of them might be a single wire. So in my case, I have a dual temperature switch. So it has a little custom adapter on it. So we have one for a single switch that's right up here that will have just one connector, and then right down below we have a dual switch where you have two connectors going into it. So you would have two plugs connecting to that. So as you can see, that's a 2-pin. I think some might be 3 pins. I think those are for the very, very new cars. But for the ones that are 2 pins or 1 pin, you just need to get something. You can get like little T-splices if you wanted to keep the original car's oil pressure switch light, because if you do take it off, cut it off from the sensor itself, or you can add another connector, but I think that's a little bit more work. This will be the most cheap and fastest way, is you can get these guys and just tap it into the wire. Just make sure you know which wire to tap it into. I did it on both wires on that one, and that one worked fine on either side. So you just get this, basically the way how you do it for this little connector is that you'd get this right in between there, just like that, and then you just go ahead and crimp them down. So make sure that gets spliced, that it's nowhere else. Obviously the red one is going to be for like the 16 gauge or whatever. The yellow wire is going to be your thicker one. So make sure you get the correct gauge. These can get on Amazon, they're pretty cheap. So if you get them on Amazon, they're very cheap. If you get them at your auto parts store, literally what you buy this one whole bag for, I think you get like 50 or 100. You can buy this same at AutoZone for maybe like 5 or 6 of them. So it's a little bit overpriced at the auto parts store. Just so you're fully aware of, try to get all these little butt connectors online, which I did and stuff. I got everything all on Amazon. They make sure you have a good crimper, just so you know, for decent. You can get one at Harbor Freight. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and run our first setup. We're gonna get everything all dialed in for the oil pressure switch. Same thing for the water temperature switch. You need to locate your temperature sensor for the coolant. So mine's located right here. I have a dual wire. Some cars might have 2. There'll be a signal wire to the cluster, or there might be one to the like the computer itself. So some cars have 2 sensors. For this one, we only have 1. Again, you can add a second one if you'd like, but on this case, I'm not. I'm just gonna tap into it, just so we're fully aware. This one, it needs it for the computer, obviously, because this one specifically goes to the computer, because this has a little, this is a TBI conversion. All right, so next things next, we're just gonna get those both set up. I'm gonna go ahead and dial in everything, get those going, and then I'll go ahead and show you how I routed everything. Again, it's not gonna be a full-on detail. It's just gonna give you a basic idea. If you do damage anything on your own, that's on your sole responsibility. This is just how a setup of how I would do it in this case of kind of like a semi how to, but if you don't know what you're doing, take it to someone professional. I would recommend it. But for the basic DIYers, I mean, it's not that a really bad job. There might be some cars that might be a little bit more hardcore. So coming up where the steering column is, usually you guys would have your ignition coil, your ignition wires, usually on the steering column. But in my case, mine is more down below. As you can see right here, you can get a better angle on what's going on right here. So basically what I'm doing is I want to see where my voltage is on my key on position, not starting just the key on, because once it falls back into that place, that after you start the car, that the key will stay on that position. So we're going to put our voltmeter right there on the on position at 12 volts, but mine goes to 20. So we're going to put the key on the on position so you can hear everything prime. So it's on the second click. So you have one click. So this will be, that's one click. That's for your accessory. And then basically that's where all the power would be on. So that's where we want it. Because after we start the car, that your ignition will fall back right into this place. So now that we have that right there, that's the one what we want to see. So you would get one test lead on where that wire is, just to make sure you're getting voltage. And you would find a good ground. So once you find a good ground, that's right there, you should get voltage of the state of charge of the battery. So now we know that we have that. So again, we want to make sure that it's right there, 12 volts. And then basically you just put it on each wire on that. So you only want it to be at 12 volts when you have the key on that on position. One wire is going to be 12 volts, obviously. And then the other two wires, without the key on the on position, they should be dead. So once you move the key on the on position, one of those wires should get voltage, and then that's how you know which one you want it to be on. So again, we want it on accessory number 2, where everything's all powered on, including the fuel pump and all that. So we're going to go ahead and get that wire all tapped in. As you can see, there's already a butt connector already on there, so someone made my life a lot more easier on that. So when you are testing that, make sure that you don't touch any grounds with the lead that's actually on this side, because you might fry something and damage something. So just be careful when you're touching on positive wires. So those are those little T-splices. That's why I love those guys, because they're a lot more cleaner and you won't have to cut into the wires like butt connectors and all that, and again expose the wires too as well. So all right, let me go ahead and get that wire rounded up, because that's going to be our accessory wire. And then we have an illumination wire, since I'm might as well right here. So some of you guys have a dimmer switch. For some of you that don't, this is my dimmer switch right here. It's a little older style. So you need to find out which one will control the voltage. So if we hook up our test lead, let's just get this one all dialed in right here. So you can see, we'll put the key on the on position. So I have that hooked up. That's my positive. It doesn't matter which lead it is, as long as you get your voltage. So obviously we have our, as you can see right here, we have nothing. It's because our headlights are not on. Let's see. All right, so once we turn on our headlights, so obviously we're gonna have our lights off. So once we turn it on the on position, our headlights need to be illuminated to find this out. So once we get that all dialed in, we'll go ahead and hook up our voltage. As you can see right there, as our voltage changed, we just need to make sure we get the right wire that we can control it. So once I start moving this little dimmer switch, the voltage should start dropping it. Did you see that right there? So I still have everything all connected. So as you can see, I still have my ground right there. I haven't moved it. I just want you to see. Well, I have everything connected. So as soon as I start moving this switch, the voltage should change. So that's the wire that we want to look for, because again, we can dim the light for the little gauges too. If you didn't care about that, if you just only want them on the on position when you turn on the lights, that is perfectly fine. Again, that's just for the light bulb section. The ignition one is to power up these guys when the key's on the on position, and then our ground will just be somewhere where we can just bolt it up to. All right, so we got a few ground wires cut out. Sorry about the whole mess. It's just right now I'm working in this area. So right here we got our positive wires. Now this is going to be for ignition setup. So obviously there's 5 connectors or 5 little units right here. But don't forget, one of our units is going to be a hot wire at all times because it's our clock. So I kept that away from the ignition, and I only did 4 because we only want 4 of these guys to be only on when the ignition switch is on. So that's the only time I'm going to care about that. And so for the clock, it has to be hot at all times, and then obviously we can tie in our ground unit with that. So we have our 4 wires going in right here. I did a little soldering, and then we have our heat shrink right there too. We can use a heat gun or a lighter. If you're going to use a lighter, just make sure you're not making contact with the lighter on this and that you're using the heat from the lighter. So as you can see that we have this all soldered. I will show that for the ground wire once I solder that. I gave it a little decent length just so we can have it much more cleaner and all that. And as you can see for right there, we have that set up. All right, so next setup, we are going to be doing our ground wires, and then I'm going to be showing you how much to cut and then where to and then how we're going to basically solder these wires. Now the same thing for this guy. We will make sure our ground wire is connected in series with those ones, but as for the positive wire, we're going to have for our illumination, because obviously we want our lights to be damped, but our ground wire can be tied in with these ground wires itself. So the ground unit itself can be tied in because we can all share the same ground. All right, let's get this all set up. I'm going to get the wires all trimmed up, and then once we get right back to all that, then I'll go to show you how to solder and how to do all that. All right, so we got everything about cut out. So basically you want to cut out these to about like 1/2 inch. So about 1/2 inch to about 1 inch, just in case. Or 3/4 inch, I'm sorry. 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch length. So I did these about almost 1/2 inch. So obviously we're going to have one set tied in. And then the one for our lights, we're just going to be connecting our negative in there too. And so this guy, we're just going to put in the middle of all of them. Grab one side, grab the other side. I want you to make sure. So I have them in between 3. So 3 on this side and 3 on the other side. If that would focus. So again, we're going to go ahead and just slide those right in. And then I'm just going to grab them, make sure all the wires are contacting, and we're just going to spin them all around. So just want to keep spinning them until they're nice and firm. And once they're nice and firm, we can hold it like that, and then we can go ahead and solder. So for your soldering gun, make sure that your tip's nice and clean, obviously. And then mine's a little power probe. This is wireless, so I'm going to go ahead and let this warm up, and then we'll get right back to the video. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and start soldering. This is going to be a little bit tedious to do. So we're going to have one hand right here. I have some, this is the solder itself. Now, it's like $29 a roll. I do solder a lot, so I get the whole huge roll. What I like to do is I like to dab my soldering gun with the solder. So I just don't mind the smoke. This one has a little bit of a flux core in it. So we'll go ahead and start the process. The reason why I like to soak it in solder is just because so it can actually dissipate the heat faster. Or not dissipate, spread out the heat. And so as you're applying heat to the copper wire, just make sure you're soaking up around that area where the gun is actually at, and then you can start working your way around. And as you can see, it's already starting to spread throughout the whole area. All right, cool. So we got all our soldering. All right, cool. So we got all the soldering in, nice and done. Pretty straightforward. So we got it all set, so we're good. So try pulling back the wire. If you can pull back any wires, then go ahead and try to redo it again. So all right, so now we need to go ahead and put our heat shrink. So I got to put a pretty decent size heat shrink on this one because obviously we have a lot of wires right there. So the heat shrink, as for the ground wire, it doesn't really matter, but still, I mean, you want to have a nice little clean loop wire setup. It's the positive one that you really want to worry about, because if that one makes contact, you can cause a fire and then your life will be a nightmare. So with the heat gun or with the lighter, again, you can actually heat shrink this whole setup. Since I have the heat gun, I can do this, and all said and done. And so you're just going to spin it all the way around until it starts shrinking. Hence why heat shrink, the name for it. All right, so just be careful with all the soldering gun and all that. Put it in a nice spot, and the heat gun, because it is pretty hot. All right, so now that we got that, and then obviously we'll go ahead and set this up later. We'll go ahead and wire that up. Now for our little butt connectors, when we cut those out, I already did the red one. Just didn't want to show that, but for the black one, I'll go ahead and show just a sample on one of them. So you're gonna go ahead and cut, not a full size, probably maybe almost up to about half. Spin the wire. I think I cut a little bit too much on that one. Then we'll go ahead and get our little butt connector. Oh no, that's a pretty decent size. Usually you want to cut this length amount. So if you can cut that length amount, the same setup as the other one, you should be good. So all right, so now we're gonna go ahead and crimp it down. So after you're done crimping, what you need to do is kind of pull back about maybe about 5 pounds of pressure, just to make sure that doesn't escape. And then once you do that, then you're gonna go ahead and repeat that for the other steps. Then after we're done doing that, you're gonna get your heat shrink and just put it right over. I think that's the bigger one. One of them actually fits over pretty tight. Well, anyways, we'll go ahead and get it right over there. And then you're gonna use a blade. So we're just only gonna cut the piece that we want to cut. So once we cut that, it'll look just like that, and then you're done from there. Yeah, so we're gonna go ahead and repeat that for all the other ones, and then we'll get right back to the video. Also, one thing I did forget to mention too, as for the copper wire, so the copper wire, as you can see that the wires are just going in parallel. What you want to do is you want to give them a nice twist. So you're just going to give them a twist so that it gives it a better contact. So you're going to go ahead and do that for all of them, and even when you're the wires that you're going to solder to as well. All right, so for our gauges, again, I'm going to put the oil all the way to the farthest left, and then we will be putting the water temperature, fuel gauge, clock, or no, alternator, then clock. So that's going to be my setup. However you want to do your setups, up to you. Also, one thing I forgot to mention earlier in the video is that don't forget to heat shrink these two as well to heat them up so that they do tighten up around this area so that they don't move around. All right, so next step, we're going to go ahead and dial these in. I did cut a little small amount just so, as you can see, for a quick disconnect later on in the future if my customer did want to disconnect these, and also for just later on down the road if he didn't want to run the same setup with another setup, so that it's not fully one series wire. I just want to have them as quick disconnect. So I did that for the 3 main ones, obviously, because that's the ones that we're going to be doing. So for the other 2, I didn't really care about those. But So again, we're gonna do oil first. We would have oil going right through here. I'll go ahead and get that dialed in. To hold it, they'll come with these little brackets. Now these brackets need to go on the inside, just like that. And then once you get those right in, you can go ahead and slide the other piece. You would slide in this guy right in there. Make sure all the wire harness is in there. So that's how it would be. So you'd have the wire harness just like that. Both wire harnesses will go on the bottom, and then the light would be up on top, so you're not pinching anything. And then you would tighten down your bolt. So it would go the little crush washer, the locking washer up on bottom. So it's gonna look just like that, and then you're gonna have your nut up on top of that. So it's gonna go washer first, then the nut. So let me go ahead and get this all dialed in. All right, so we got everything all set up. Basically the way how I did it is I put the wires right through one little coarse side right through here, and then obviously for our light bulbs I didn't make sure I didn't connect that one into it, because obviously that's going to be going on the top side of that. All right, so what's next? We can go ahead and start hooking these guys right up. The only thing I mostly don't have hooked up is this guy right here, but I just need to connect it to the battery. So I'm going to get the positive terminal and have that set up to the battery. And I have this one already all set up for the voltage. That will tie down with the other ones. Yeah, I think that's pretty much, this is the only one I still need to rewire, and then I need to add the other 3 wires to it. So I just need to find out which one is the fuel gauge wire. Once I get all that up, we're gonna go ahead and bolt these guys right up, and then we'll get right back to the video. All right, so we got all our meters all set up. So the only one that's gonna be working properly is gonna be our voltmeter. And obviously, as you can see, we got that all set up. This one might move because it doesn't have any resistance in. I believe it was this cable. If we get it to move, I just ground it out. Yeah, you can see it moving right there. Same thing, you can see if they're working. Now this is just only for the signal wire. I'm just grounding out the signal wire so you can see that. And then for the oil pressure, so we got those up and running. So far so good. I'll go ahead and show you the back. All right, so right now it's a little messy. Once I clean this all up, I'm gonna tap it in right there. Obviously our ground wire, it's gonna be bolted to the, you can actually bolt it into the body itself. I just used a re-existing old harness that was bolted from the previous person that tried to do this job. And then obviously right there goes our power wire. So the moment when we put the key on the on position from earlier, that'll work out. So now all that's left for the illumination I need to connect this to the illumination light, get that dialed in, and then we'll start connecting our little sensors. So I'm gonna go ahead and do this, and then once I start routing up our wires for everything, then I'll get right back to the video. All right, so we got the wire hooked up for this. This will be all said and done earlier. But once we turn on the headlights, as you can see, let me get that flash off. So you can see the lights right there, and then that's us dimming it. So you can, I know it's not that much of a brightness, but you can kind of see them dimming out. So that's or that's like very low on the light. Well, now that's high. That's off, on. So we got all that to work. Now we're gonna go ahead and run in our oil gauges, water gauge, and then our fuel. So update on the oil pressure switch. So I had my customer order a autometer. Here's the part number. This is for this vehicle, but I mean they're all the same setup. 2242. I don't think that it matters. There's 2 oil pressure sensors, and obviously I highly doubt that both of them can be bad, but hey, you never know. But this one was shorting out, I assume. I don't know, but I'm pretty sure if not, then this didn't work with the autometer. But there's our new one that we got installed. So every time when I would put the key on the on position, this would automatically shoot to 100, and then it would actually go all the way down. All right, so for our new one, where are you? So our oil pressure switch right there. So when we put the key on the on position, So as you can see, it moves. And then it starts working like as it should. So let's give it a little gas. So obviously we know that's working. And so forth. So now what's left is that we're going to do the water. I had them get another piece right here. There's the part number 2385 for the coolant temperature sensor. So we're gonna hook up, I'm gonna hook up this, and then yeah, we'll get right back to the video. Also, for the oil pressure switch, the one that this one came with, it didn't come with no silicone or whatever. I mean, not silicone, any sealant or anything like that. So what I did was I used some PTFE thread sealant. This works out pretty good for oil. I mean, you can use this for anything, but you can either use Teflon if you have Teflon, but I use that. That's just for long term, so it doesn't leak and all that sense. So forth. But yeah, once I get the oil coolant temperature sensor hooked up, we'll get right back to the video. There's another spot for that coolant temperature. Hopefully, I'm praying that that's the same thread that I can use. It's all the way right there, just a little bit above it, so you can see it right there above that red wire. So I'm gonna get that dialed in and we'll get things working out. All right, so we got in our new coolant temperature sensor. I just gotta fix up, gotta add some more sealant to actually the little adapter piece. So we got that dialed in and so forth. We got it all connected in to right here. I just have them as quick disconnect just in case. And as you can see, if we put the key, I let it warmed up a little bit, and then you can see it right there. So we're actually pretty good on that. Last one, we got to hook up the fuel. So I got to chase out the wire for the fuel one, and I think that's pretty much it besides the miles per hour one. So I'm gonna get everything all dialed in, get that up, get the fuel in, and then yeah, it's coming along nicely, guys. There we have it. All right, so we got everything all dialed in. We got our tachometer up and running. We got our miles per hour. We don't know, or I don't know if that works yet. We might need to get an adapter for that one because this one is cable, it's not electrical, and so forth. So we got all our gauges in and everything. Then I added that little adapter right there. All right, so we got everything all dialed in. We got our turn signals working. You can see right there, we got the high beams working. And then we got obviously the RPM working. Then the miles per hour, I think the gauge is just faulty, or we might need an adapter for that. Not too sure, but we got the oil pressure switch, the temperature, the fuel, the volts. Then again, I even hooked up this guy right here. So if the customer wanted to charge his phone, I made sure that this was hot at all times until you hit the switch. So just in case if you have the car off and so forth. But yeah, I mean, if this video helped you out, give it a thumbs up. Comment down below if you have any questions, and hit that subscribe button for more upcoming videos in the future. And thanks for watching.